Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're going to be talking about the reality of inner work. And the reason I'm going to be talking about this is I want to create a really clear image and perspective on what actually changes when you do deep shadow work, meditation, hypnotherapy, and do it for an extended period of time. Because there's some really amazing changes. And there's also a lot of people who will say, this happens, this happens, this happens, but it's usually just grandiose storylines that they've made up and aren't really real. So we want to create this a real reality of the beauty of inner work, but keeping it in a way that actually keeps us grounded and not breaking away from the external and actual realness of doing this work. Okay, so I'm going to go for a little bit what I think are like the core changes, at least that I've experienced, that I see a lot with clients. And one of the first things that changed for me and often changes for clients is that experience of stress, anxiety, resistance, even depressive symptoms. That very quickly, if you're doing the right work, drops away, right? Maybe not 100%, but maybe 98%. And what tends to get replaced with it is usually a sense of really peace and bliss. And so if I look back to before this journey started for me, and sometimes it's really hard to actually reconcile how far you've come. You can kind of diminish it. But when I really look back and I think, what was my actual experience day to day? And I'll be honest, it was really hard. Like I would wake up and I would feel a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, whether it was going to do work or going to university, when I was at like 5 years ago. And it was just like every day was just getting through the day. And then when I would finally finish the day and I would get to chill and relax, that would be my escape. And I would look forward the whole day to escape with video games or just watching like Netflix. And none of these things are bad, but it was an escape for me. It was a way of actually feeling like okay. And that was my daily reality. It was stress, it was anxiety, it was feeling this real pain in my heart, feeling like really tense when I was around people, like worried about making a mistake or saying the wrong thing. And just constantly, people call it survival, but just constantly in, trying to get through the day. Instead of enjoying, instead of actually living life, it was a battle every single day. And this isn't because I'm special or had something terrible happen to me. It's just this has offered me experience of a lot of people actually when we look inside and we cope with entertainment, we cope with even exercise sometimes. We cope with all these different things, but when we look into ourselves and we see what's actually happening, it's often the real stress and anxiety. And so that's the first thing that goes because it's the most obvious, right? It's the most obvious thing that we can work on. And breaking through that often isn't that difficult. The second thing, and I see this as being limitless and being free. And so what I like to see it as is removing the stress and anxiety is like removing the bottom. It's allowing so we almost can't fall down, right? So in my daily life, there's a robustness and a sense of whatever happens, I'm going to be okay. Right? So I'm not going to fall into this real stress, this real anxiety, this real worry, because that kind of bottom layer has been removed and replaced with just a natural sense of peace and bliss. So I view that as like the bottom kind of layer, if that makes sense. But then the top layer, and this is something that often we can miss, is the limits, right? What is our experience of life? What can we actually do now that we're just operating from this beautiful peace and bliss? And we actually enjoy our life, we feel good in our body, we feel good in our mind. What can we create in life? And this is where we want to get to a place of limitless freedom. And looking at, well, where have I taken on limits, right? That I can't do this, or this is too much, or you shouldn't ask for that. right? How many times have you heard that? How many times have maybe you heard it from yourself, right? Either you've said it out loud or you've said it in your head, where you're going, part of you, that inspired part is like, I want to do this. I want to build a business to 6 or 7 figures, right? I want to work with wonderful people, or maybe it's a different goal. I want to have the best relationship. And then a part of us, or maybe not even a part of us, maybe an introject, right? Someone else's voice comes and goes, no, that's too much, right? Shouldn't ask for that. That's rude. That's impolite, whatever it might be. And it shuts us down. It stops us from accessing all the capacity we would have to go and reach that goal. And I often find it's really interesting. I work with a lot of amazing entrepreneurs or people who run sales teams or are closers, and they'll have a goal, and it's not that they can't get to a goal. It's just that they're not able to use their capacity for it, right? They got to a certain amount, let's say they got to, 20K, right? And that's comfortable, that's within their range. But to get further than that, 30, 40, 50, or maybe go from 6 to 7 figures, whatever it might be, that breaks their reality, that breaks their limit. And for them, it's not that they couldn't get there, or they can't, or they don't have the skill set. It's that the part of, they're not able to use all their resources to get to that place. They're not able to use all their mental capacity because that part, that introject is like, no, it's shutting them down. I had a client like this. We're actually going to speak about him a little bit later, and he really wanted to do events. And he was really successful, right? He was running 7-figure sales teams. And yet, while he had this amazing knowledge, he was incredibly skilled. When it came to public speaking events, he was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. That might be too much. And so when we did the work together, we were able to break these limits and get into that freedom and really allow that part to drop away, that introject to drop away, so that, events is now within his reality, right? He had all this capacity, all this skill, but it was only able to use in this bit for being a sales manager and running teams. But then it was able to this wall was able to break. He was able to become limitless, at least in this way. And now events was included in that. And he was able to use all that skill, all that capacity to go and run events and be really successful with it. And so that's what I believe limitless and being really free is all about, right? We drop the bottom with removal of the stress and anxiety, but then we open up the top to just whatever we can experience. And it's not magic, right? I'm going to talk about what this is not in a moment. This isn't magic, but just what would you be if you could use all your capacity? And that's what I think of it as, right? And you can have inflated storylines, that's fine, right? I'm not saying these things don't exist or they're wrong. I'm just saying we don't need them to do this work and to achieve all of our dreams, right? We don't need to believe in something to do that. We can actually just see it as when we remove these limits and freedom, it's not that it just magically comes to us, it's that we're now within our entire 100% capacity to go forward and do it instead of getting in our own way. Like ultimately, I feel that the human capacity is so big, and often we're experiencing a limited experience of that. Sometimes we experience a big experience of it. Like in some areas we might be 80, 90%. You probably thrive in those areas. But in some areas, maybe we're operating at 10, 20% if we've got a lot of shadows and constructs around it. And so when we break those limits, we break those ideas in the mind, we ultimately just get access to that 100%. That's how I view it. The next bit, and this goes back to the first one, but truth is I've just removed so much suffering from my life. Life, instead of being something I need to get through, need to get to the end of the day, need to get salvation from or escape from, it has become something truly enjoyable, right? Truly blissful, peaceful, and something I'm excited to be in and excited to be alive for. And I love seeing that in myself, in clients, because I think that's one of the core things here. You know, and that's a little hard to advertise and market, right? Remove suffering. All right, good one, bro. But that is really at the core of this. You know, when we do this, when we remove the stress and anxiety, when we open up limitlessness, that's wonderful. But I think at the core of that is the aliveness, the enjoyment of life. You get to be here and actually feeling like you get to be here. Not telling yourself that you should be grateful. I should be grateful, and I have to force gratitude, but just organically waking up and being like, oh, wow, this is wonderful. And that being organic, not something that we should do or something we've told ourselves we should wake up and do, but just something that naturally arises. I think that's honestly probably the most beautiful part of this work is being able to enjoy life. And finally, I've put as power and influence, and I want to be really specific. Power and influence means reowning your own power, right? Instead of projecting outside, this person said this, they did that. Reowning the power to where we don't even get triggered by that. We're able to know what we can do, where we might have limits physically, and we're able to feel really comfortable within ourselves. We're not getting changed by the world. We're not getting triggered or upset or angry at the world. That's, to me, is real power. And actually, when we reown that, it's called projection reowning. We often experience way more vitality in our own life, right? And we often experience, I see it as influence instead of control, because control is often very tense. I'm going to try and control life, but we can see that we can really influence life. See that we are co-creating. We have immense power and immense influence, right? But we don't need to get frustrated in things that we don't have control over. And that to me is real power. And that comes with inner work, when we do the deep projection work. But I want to be clear, who am I? Like, why should you even listen to me? Some of you, you've been around a while, you know what's up, you know who I am, you know what I've experienced. But for those of you who haven't, basically my story starts when I had a somewhat successful business, right? I did really well those first few months, so I was about 18 at the time. And then it just declined. But the reason it declined is because I was really sabotaging myself. I got to a place where I was like, oh, this is a little uncomfortable. This is like, oh, I don't know, like maybe that's too much, right? I was having the limits put on myself. Oh, this feels too much. And so I just brought myself down, right? Because the stress and the anxiety and the limits were so strong, but I couldn't cope with it. I couldn't deal with it, and I couldn't make the business stay or keep doing well. But what it led me to do is I had an incredible mentor at the time who was a world-class coach and hypnotherapist. And he invited me to come work for him, be a coach in his company, and actually live with a 73-year-old Buddhist nun. And she was living with us. It was me, this world-class coach, and this 73-year-old Buddhist nun. She had been a nun for many, many decades. And she was extremely senior and extremely knowledgeable. And so I was in this experience. At this time, I was about in my early 20s. And for 2 years, it was like hours of meditation being taught by her directly. And then hours of shadow work, hypnotherapy, coaching, all of these different modalities, right? More of the Western modalities and the Eastern from her. And just for 2 years, every single day, that was my life. It was learning this and then doing hours and hours of calls, helping other people do this, working for him. And for 2 years, that was all I did. To the point where now I've probably done thousands of hours of meditation, like multiple thousands at this point. And, thousands of hours of shadow work, hypnotherapy, and doing calls for others as well. And so within that experience, all of this stuff has changed for me. Like I said, I went from stress and anxiety to peace and real bliss on a genuine, like 98% 8% of the time, I'd say that gets to be my experience, which is something I'm incredibly grateful for. I generally feel limitless and free. I don't really experience suffering, and I feel like I have a great deal of power and influence in my life. And a lot of my clients experience the same. So that is maybe why you might want to listen a little bit, but it's up to you. Because what that experience taught me was, well, it taught me a couple of things. Number one, it taught me what real inner work looks like, right? Before that, you know, the 5-minute meditation, the 10-minute sound bath healing, or whatever you want to call it. And that's fine, love it, enjoy. But, you know, this amazing lady, her name was Sister Kema, Buddhist nun, she was like, all right, go do 3 hours meditation. I'm like, 3 hours? What? Like, what about 20 minutes? No, she's like, no. We'll get there. It's like, all right, fair enough. You can do 30 minutes, then get to an hour every day. And we got to 2 hours every day, and eventually we were doing 3 hours every single day. And it just, her perspective and her energy of like, this is what you need to do if you really want to break through. And I don't feel you need to do that much, but she wanted me to be able to train people in the way she does. And so she was like, all right, you got to be the real deal. This isn't about just kind of feeling good. This is about really understanding how the mind works at the core, understanding how constructs are created, understanding how we can break through that. And that gave me such a deep perspective of what it looks like to make real change, right? Instead of just a moment of feeling good, you do the 5-minute healing, to actually like penetrative healing, right? And that's been the model that I've used to decide who I learn from in terms of mentors. Are they the real deal? And since then, I've worked with some amazing people, truly amazing. But let's get clear, what is inner work not? Because I think this is less touched upon. Everyone wants to talk about how amazing it is, and it is truly amazing. But there are some pitfalls that people fall into that I don't want you to get stuck in. And the first one is, we don't need grandiose storylines. When you're experiencing a deep state, pardon me, of love, and you feel just euphoric love for the whole world, maybe you feel a deep expansion where you're actually having an out-of-body experience, and you feel as vast as the whole universe. And you truly just feel like the best experience you've ever had. We don't need to add storylines about what that means. We don't need to say, you're now experiencing divine love and you are enlightened in some way, right? Or now from this deep state, you can just manifest everything. Well, it's just a state experience. It's a beautiful experience. It liberates your life so much, and you can get deep insight from it. But we don't need to make state experiences grandiose, right? And this is very common when we're going into spiritual experiences. People want to make a lot of stories about what they had. But I'm actually a priestess, king, monk, or something or other. And because I had this experience, that means I'm this. But at least from the way I was taught and what I've experienced, part of doing this work is getting away from the stories, is removing the identification with all of that. And they can be useful if you take on as a symbolic thing. But if you start telling yourself, I'm this, I'm that, I'm amazing, I had this amazing experience, and that means I'm this, it's just more hijacking to make yourself feel more secure, right? And that's not a dig, that is just something that people can get trapped in, where they try and make the experience bigger than it is. Just let it be as it is, without adding extra meaning, labels, and stories to it. Because ironically, that leads to deeper experiences. When we're trying to label every experience, we're trying to make it bigger, we actually limit how great this can be, how wonderful it can be. And that leads on to the second one. You know, this isn't magic manifestation, right? And I feel very strongly about alignment and co-creation. There is forces beyond us and this sort of a thing. But sometimes people can get stuck in thinking they're in some incredible state and suddenly, you know, a Lamborghini is just going to kind of fly down. And it just doesn't seem to happen, that I've seen, right? And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people. I've learned from dozens of mentors. And it's not that this is wrong, it's just it comes back to the grandiose storylines. We don't need to add more stories to what we're experiencing, right? Often I find people, when they do this work, they do get more of what they want, right? But I think it comes more to the limitless, where they remove the barriers and they get to use that 100% capacity. And then they often actually show up in a better way, right? You know, I've had clients where they started showing up on videos and they've got a completely different energy about them. And energy, I feel, is very real. Energy can connect us, right? Energy can actually help us feel magnetic to others, right? This is very real. But I feel that comes from accessing 100% of you instead of just, you know, calling it in and manifesting it. But that's still something that you can be curious about. The key here is just not generating extra stories about the experience, right? And it sounds a little bit dull, it sounds a little bit boring, I get it. Ultimately, I came from a lineage that was about removing of storylines, right? That's what my teacher, this Buddhist nun, taught me. It wasn't about adding extra, it's about removing and finding out the truth of who you really are. And that can give us such capacity to show up in the world and to create our dreams and to live them. But we don't need to add stories about what that is, right? We don't need to add extra. Okay, I hope I'm articulating myself. This is something I haven't spoken about before. And the final thing is, it's not an escape. This is not a way to remove yourself from life, right? This is not a way to remove yourself from the lived experience. This is a way to integrate within the lived experience. You know, this is not the path of renunciation, where you go, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to go and live in a cave and meditate. But if you want to do that, you're probably not watching me, right? Because you probably don't have a phone. And I don't think caves have Wi-Fi. So when we're doing all of this, the question you've got to ask is, can you bring this home? Because that's the hero's journey. Can you bring it home, right? When you learn and really get in touch with your true self, with your absolute depth, with who you really are, can you bring it into your life? Can you bring it into your work, into your business? Or does it only happen when you're on retreat in the jungle? If it's that, that's okay, but then your journey and your path is bringing it home, is bringing it back, is integrating it. That's what it's all about, right? That's the whole point of this work. You know, my teacher, Sister Kama, she didn't care how deep states or the deepest states you could access or how long you could meditate. That was partially important to deepen your practice. But her ultimate goal was, could you bring kindness and metta, which is loving kindness, into the world? Because if not, then what's the point? If you can't be kinder to the people in your life, be more loving to yourself, then it doesn't really matter how many retreats you've done, because you didn't really learn anything, right? And that doesn't mean going into people pleasing, because sometimes a pattern we have to break is actually politeness to feel safe. But through that, we can unlock a deeper compassion and kindness for ourselves and others. And that is one of the biggest parts of this, right? Yes, we get to live our dreams. Yes, we get to liberate ourselves. But we also want to show up in a beautiful way for others, right? That's the point. But is this just me, right? I mean, I've spoken about my experience, what's happened to me, but I want to use an example of someone else that I've worked with for a long time, amazing client of mine. And, his experience was we worked together for about 12 months. But when we met, he couldn't meditate. Like, he couldn't sit down to meditate because he would feel so much tension and resistance in his body. It would really freak him out. It would create so much anxiety, and he would live with that stress throughout the whole day. Whereas through the work, through breaking the constructs, through the shadow work, shadow to light work, we got to the experience where not only can he meditate, that was the first things we broke through, and he can sit down for hours if he likes, but his body is not taking on that stress, that resistance, that anxiety anymore. Neither is his mind. And what got replaced was a deep peace and bliss. And for him, most importantly, a deep sense of safety. Right? That was the core part of it. And so now that's what he gets to live with. And we've worked on a bunch of other stuff, right? One of the other things we worked on was the limitlessness. He's the guy I spoke about with the events, who he was running he still is running these 7-figure teams, sales teams. And he wanted to do events, and now he's doing events. He's public speaking, he's doing amazing work. But he does all of that with this 24/7 peace, this 24/7 bliss, this 24/7 safety. And so now his experience is, not only is he limitless, right, in these ways, but that bottom layer was removed, where he's not experiencing suffering day to day. He's actually able to experience a deep sense of safety and harmony in the body and real peace. And that's what it's all about. And we got to most of this within the first few months, and then the last kind of 9 months or so I've been working on new different things, kind of allowing it to grow and more playful stuff. What's really fun, I'm actually going to do a video about this, of the phases of freedom, right? Because there's actually different stages we go to. The first one is often breaking through the stress and anxiety. Then we move into deeper goals and more interesting work, in my opinion. But it's important that we get this stuff out of the way first. And so this tends to be the experience of the people I've worked with and the people who are doing similar work to me, because that's what inner work is all about. It's really allowing the constructs, the meanings that are creating the stress and anxiety to break down, so that we can live in organic light, organic safety, organic bliss and peace. And doing all of that without creating extra stories about what we're doing, without creating extra meanings about what that means about us, but just getting to experience it and letting that be your life.